Welcome to our new episode. Today we're diving into something pretty amazing, the connection between cities and how civilizations developed.
Yeah, it's one of those things, we don't always think about, but
Totally.
cities have been like this driving force behind so much of human progress.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
When you look at the big picture, it's mind-blowing. We're talking literacy, trade, art, even governments.
Yeah.
None of that would be what it is today without cities, right?
Exactly. It's hard to imagine those things evolving in the same way without that unique urban environment.
So, okay, let's break this down a bit. For most of human history, people were living in small villages, rural communities. What was it about cities that flipped the script and led to such massive change?
Well, think about village life. It's all about tradition. You basically do things the way your ancestors did, but cities, they're like these mixing pots. You've got people coming from all over with different backgrounds, different beliefs.
So that mix is really what sparks things.
Exactly. It creates this energy, a dynamism that you just don't find in more isolated places. Innovation thrives in that kind of environment.
Makes sense. It's not just the number of people, but the diversity of thought and experiences, right?
Absolutely. To give you a picture, imagine you're a farmer in a village. Your world is pretty limited. But in a city, you're rubbing shoulders with merchants from distant lands, hearing stories about far-off places. Maybe you meet people who practice a completely different religion or who have skills you've never even seen before.
It's like a constant influx of new ideas and information.
Exactly. And that kind of stimulation, that exchange, it pushes people to think differently, to solve problems in new ways.
Fascinating. So these early cities, they're becoming hubs, not just for people, but for information, new ways of seeing the world. Did that directly translate into the advancements we see in those early civilizations?
Oh, absolutely. Let's take writing as an example. We see writing systems emerge in early cities like those in Mesopotamia. Why there? Well, cities created a need for record keeping, for tracking transactions, for communication on a larger scale.
I could see that. Trying to remember everything or just relying on word of mouth wouldn't really cut it in a busy city.
Right. And once writing develops, think about the possibilities that opens up. Sharing knowledge, storytelling, cultural expression, all those things take off.
So the urban environment created a very specific need, and humans, being inventive as we are, figured out a way to address it.
Exactly. And that pattern repeats itself across different areas of development.
It's like cities became these engines for innovation, pushing things forward in a way that just wouldn't have been possible in smaller communities, right?
That's a great way to put it. And it's not just writing. Think about the incredible structures built in those early cities. The temples, the palaces, the complex irrigation systems. Those things required serious engineering and architectural know-how, skills that developed in response to the demands of city life.
It's pretty mind-blowing when you think about it, those early city dwellers pushing the boundaries of what was possible with the technology they had.
Totally. And it wasn't all purely practical either. Cities also became centers for art and culture. With the wealth generated through trade, you had elites who could support artists. That led to the creation of intricate sculptures, murals, all these incredible forms of artistic expression we still admire today.
So you have talent, resources, ambition, all of it concentrated in these early cities. No wonder they became such breeding grounds for progress. But I imagine it wasn't all grand temples and cultural flourishing, was it? There had to be downsides to this rapid urbanization as well.
Oh, for sure. Life in those early cities had its challenges. Sanitation, for example, is a huge problem. You've got dense populations living in close quarters, often with very basic waste disposal systems. Perfect conditions for disease to spread.
Something we often forget when we romanticize the past, right? Disease must have been a constant threat.
Definitely. It makes you wonder if those downsides ever outweighed the benefits of city life.
Yeah. So even with the risks, were cities still seen as places of opportunity?
They were. The chance for economic advancement, education, social mobility, the exposure to new ideas, those were powerful draws. People were willing to brave the risks for a chance at a better life.
It makes sense. So you have these cities full of people from different backgrounds with competing interests and all this concentrated wealth. Didn't that create the need for a new approach to leadership? You need something more organized than just village elders making decisions.
You're absolutely right. The complexity of city life, the need to manage resources, the potential for conflict, all of those factors force people to think differently about social organization. It's like you said, you can't just have village elders trying to manage a city of thousands. It just wouldn't work.
So did cities essentially invent government as we know it?
It's not quite that simple, but they definitely played a huge role. In a village, yeah, You might have elders or rely on tradition to settle disputes, but in a city, you've got so many people interacting from all walks of life. You need laws, you need leadership, you need systems to make sure things run smoothly.
Cities almost had to become more structured, more organized than those smaller communities, right?
Exactly. And we see this when we look at the archaeology. As cities grew, they developed more and more complex forms of government. Evidence of city councils, specialized roles like tax collectors, judges, and eventually powerful rulers, kings, emperors who oversaw these complex urban societies.
So the challenges of city life actually drove these innovations in how people govern themselves.
Yeah.
Did that have an impact beyond the city itself, though, like the surrounding areas?
Absolutely. A powerful city could easily control the rural areas around it, both economically and militarily, and this often led to the formation of early states, with the city at the center of a network of towns and villages.
It's like these cities, they're generating wealth through trade, they've got these sophisticated systems of government, and they naturally start to expand their influence, bringing more people and resources under their control.
Exactly. And in a lot of cases, the growth of cities and the formation of states went hand in hand. The city provided the economic engine and the administration for the state, and the state in turn offered protection and stability for the city.
It really highlights how connected the rise of cities is to the development of civilizations. We tend to think of them as separate, but they were intertwined from the very beginning.
Totally. But it's important to remember this wasn't always a peaceful or fair process. The growth of cities and states sometimes came at the expense of other communities, leading to conflict and conquest.
So this concentration of power and resources while it was driving progress also created new problems and inequalities. It reminds us that history is never a straight line of progress.
You got it. And that's why it's so crucial to study history, to understand the complexities of the past so we can learn from them and make better decisions today.
All of this makes me think about the role of trade in the rise of cities. We've talked about them as hubs of innovation and government, but weren't they also essential centers for trade?
Absolutely. You could even argue that trade was the lifeblood of many early cities. Think about it. They were often strategically located along trade routes, whether on rivers, coastlines, or at crossroads. This access to trade networks brought in wealth, attracted skilled workers, and provided the resources that fueled their growth.
It's like these cities functioned as giant marketplaces, bringing buyers and sellers together from all over. Did this have an effect on what kinds of goods were being produced and traded?
It certainly did. As cities grew, they created a demand for a huge variety of goods and services, and this led to specialization both within the cities and in the surrounding rural areas. For example, farmers near a city might focus on producing crops that were in high demand in the urban market, like grains for bread or livestock for meat.
So the city's impact reached far beyond its walls. It shaped the economy of the whole region.
Exactly. And this specialization led to greater efficiency and productivity, which contributed to overall economic growth. Cities weren't just consuming resources, they were creating this dynamic system of production and exchange that benefited both urban and rural populations.
It's incredible to think that these early trade networks were essentially laying the groundwork for the global economy we have today. I mean, obviously the scale is totally different, but those basic principles, supply and demand specialization, the interconnectedness of markets, it all seems to have its roots in those ancient cities.
You're spot on. The seeds of globalization were sown in those bustling marketplaces. And as trade routes expanded, connecting different parts of the world, they weren't just transporting goods. They were also carrying ideas, technologies, cultural practices, fostering exchange and interaction across vast distances.
That's something that often gets overlooked. Trade wasn't just about economic exchange. It was a powerful engine for cultural diffusion and the spread of knowledge.
Precisely. And that exchange of ideas was just as important as the exchange of goods in shaping the course of civilization.
It makes you realize how much we owe to those early cities. They weren't just places to live. They were the crucibles of progress, the drivers of innovation, the marketplaces of the world.
And they still play that role today. Cities are at the forefront of technological advancement, economic growth, and cultural expression.
But what about the challenges? We've talked about some of the downsides of city life in the past. Do those challenges persist today, even with all our technology and modern planning?
Yeah, they do. In many ways, the very things that draw people to cities, opportunity, diversity, those concentrated resources, they also create new pressures and inequalities.
Can you give me an example?
Sure, think about the cost of living in a big city. The demand for housing it often outstrips supply, driving up rents and property prices like crazy.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
And that creates a situation where only the wealthy can really afford to live in the most desirable areas.
Right. Pushing lower income residents to the outskirts or into housing that's not really up to par.
Exactly. And it's like this concentration of wealth in certain pockets, while others are struggling to get by, even though they might be doing essential work in the city.
It's like the benefits of city life aren't being shared equally among all the people who contribute to making the city function.
That's a good way to put it. And this economic gap, it can lead to a whole bunch of other issues: social segregation, limited access to good education and healthcare, even higher crime rates in certain neighborhoods. It's a cycle of disadvantage that can be really tough to break out of.
It sounds incredibly complex, like all these problems are so intertwined. Is there any way to create cities that are both successful economically and fair to everyone, where the benefits of urban life are more evenly distributed?
It's a huge challenge, but I think it is possible. It requires a shift in how we think about cities, moving away from seeing them solely as engines for economic growth and embracing a more holistic view, one that puts the well-being of all residents front and center.
So what would that look like in a practical sense?
Well, for one thing, we need to invest in affordable housing options, making sure that people who work in the city can actually afford to live there.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It might mean things like rent control policies, government subsidies for low-income housing, or even more innovative approaches like co-housing models.
What about other things like transportation and infrastructure? Are those part of the solution?
Absolutely. We need efficient and affordable public transport that connects all parts of the city so people aren't isolated or restricted by where they can afford to live. And we need green spaces, parks, community centers that give residents access to nature and opportunities to connect with each other.
It sounds like building a truly equitable city demands a multifaceted approach, tackling economic issues, but also social and environmental concerns.
You're absolutely right. It's about building a city that works for everyone, not just a privileged few.
This has been a really insightful conversation. I have to admit, I tend to think of cities in terms of their landmarks. The bustling streets, the museums and theaters. But we often forget about the millions of individual stories that make up a city.
That's so true. Cities are ultimately about people. They're these dynamic, ever-changing environments shaped by the interactions of everyone who lives there. And while they definitely present us with some touch challenges, they also offer incredible potential for progress, connection, and creativity.
So as more and more people move to cities, it's more important than ever to learn from the past, to understand the challenges, and really strive to create cities that are not just economic powerhouses, but also places of opportunity, sustainability, and social justice.
That's a great way to sum it up. The future of our cities, and maybe even the future of civilization itself, depends on our ability to create urban environments that are truly beneficial for all.
Well said. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the world of cities. We hope you've gained a new perspective on the complexities and the possibilities of urban life. Thanks for listening. Please leave a comment, like, and subscribe.